We often envision our lives unfolding in a predictable, stable manner, like a well-charted course where love and passion are constants, and the challenges feel manageable. In our relationships, we expect that same smooth trajectory, a deep connection with our partner that continues to grow stronger over time. But what happens when that stability, once so comforting, begins to feel more like a trap? When the routines become predictable, the excitement fades, and the bond you once shared feels distant. That's when the unsettling truth emerges. Most people don't intentionally set out to destroy their own lives. Instead, it happens quietly, in small, almost imperceptible steps. In romantic relationships, these seemingly innocent actions, small gestures, or fleeting moments gradually lead to bigger consequences. One such truth, seldom discussed openly, is why some married women become vulnerable to external temptation. It's not because they are weak, or immoral, or lack values. In fact, many of them love their husbands deeply. The truth is far more complex and deeply rooted in human nature. Temptation, attraction, and the need for emotional connection are ingrained in us. They don't announce themselves boldly, they sneak up on us in the form of casual conversations with someone outside of the marriage, a lingering glance, or the feeling of being seen again by another person. Why does this happen? Why do some married women, who seem to have everything they need, become susceptible to infidelity? The answer lies in the intricate layers of emotional and psychological needs that define human beings. We all crave connection. But for some, the drive to feel desired, validated, and alive again becomes overwhelming. It's not a conscious decision to betray a marriage. It's a search for something that has been lost along the way. In this video, we'll explore the underlying reasons why some married women become vulnerable to these temptations, not because they don't love their husbands, but because they are searching for something they once had and lost. Let's delve into the psychology behind this behavior and understand why it's not as simple as it seems. The erosion of boundaries. Why some women seek external attention. Marriages are meant to be partnerships. When two people come together, they are supposed to build a life of shared dreams, mutual respect, and emotional intimacy. A strong marriage is built on this foundation, where both partners support each other, grow together, and navigate life's challenges hand in hand. But the reality is that not all marriages remain strong over time. In the early stages, everything feels exciting. There's a sense of adventure, a connection that makes each partner feel like they are the most important person in the world. Deep conversations flow naturally, and those stolen glances across the room hold the weight of unspoken promises. But as time passes, routine begins to settle in. Life becomes more predictable, and with that predictability comes a loss of excitement. The deep emotional intimacy that once defined the relationship starts to fade. The profound connection that once sparked curiosity, passion, and anticipation begins to feel like a distant memory. Instead of discussing dreams, hopes, or future plans, conversations shift to more mundane topics: groceries, bills, schedules, and household chores. What was once a vibrant emotional partnership becomes a functional arrangement, bound by the need to keep things in order and maintain stability. Passion, once the lifeblood of the relationship, gives way to duty. There are still responsibilities to meet, but the emotional connection starts to fray. And perhaps the most heartbreaking shift occurs when one partner, typically the woman, begins to feel invisible. She's no longer the captivating woman she once was in her partner's eyes. She's no longer the object of his affection or admiration. Slowly, she starts to lose that sense of being seen, valued, and desired. The spark that once made her feel special is replaced by the exhaustion of daily life, where emotional intimacy seems like a distant memory. Dr. John Gottman, a well-known relationship expert, argues that the silent killer of relationships is not conflict, but indifference. When a woman no longer feels emotionally valued or noticed by her husband, her subconscious mind begins to seek validation elsewhere. It may start small and innocent conversation with a colleague, a friendly exchange with a stranger, or a simple gesture of kindness that sparks a flicker of attention. Sometimes, the search for external attention happens without even realizing it. This craving for acknowledgement grows quietly, almost imperceptibly, until it becomes an undeniable pull. We tend to think that women who stray are simply looking for physical attention, but the truth is much more complex. Often, it's not about the physical aspect of attraction, but about the emotional connection that's been lost. Women crave emotional intimacy, not just the physical presence of a partner. When the emotional connection fades in a marriage, she finds herself searching for something she's missing: a sense of being truly seen and heard. A simple compliment from someone outside the marriage can feel like a breath of fresh air, a validation of her worth. It's not about finding someone else to replace her partner, but rather about reigniting a sense of self-worth that has been dimmed over time. That fleeting emotional connection can become intoxicating, a much-needed boost to her confidence and identity. Marriage, at its best, provides stability. It offers a safe space to grow together, a sense of belonging and security. However, this stability often comes at a cost, the cost of predictability. As life becomes routine, the excitement that once defined the early stages of the relationship diminishes. This is where the tension begins to build. While stability provides safety and reassurance, it can also kill excitement. When life becomes too predictable, the novelty that once sparked desire begins to fade. This is where the Coolidge effect, a well-known psychological phenomenon, comes into play. The Coolidge effect states that novelty is a key trigger for desire. People are naturally drawn to the new, the unknown, and the unexplored. When a woman's life becomes monotonous, when each day feels like the last, the smallest spark of excitement, whether it's in the form of a compliment, a conversation, or a brief connection with someone outside the marriage, can feel electrifying. It's not because she doesn't love her husband, but because she is craving the thrill of feeling wanted, desired, and alive again. This yearning for excitement doesn't necessarily mean she wants to leave her marriage or that she's unhappy with her husband. It's more about the need to feel something that has faded over time. The emotional intimacy that once made her feel deeply connected to her spouse has been replaced by routine, and she's searching for something to reignite that spark. It's a subtle erosion of boundaries, a gradual shift from emotional connection to emotional detachment. Once she begins to seek this external attention, it becomes a dangerous game, one where the lines between innocent flirtation and something more substantial blur. And often, it's not until much later that she realizes how far she's drifted from the intimacy she once shared with her spouse. Ultimately, the erosion of boundaries in marriage is a natural, albeit painful, progression when emotional intimacy fades. The search for external validation, emotional connection, and excitement is not a sign of weakness or betrayal, but rather a reflection of deeply human needs. These needs are not inherently bad, they are simply a part of what makes us human. However, when left unchecked, they can lead to choices that undermine the very foundation of a relationship. Understanding these emotional dynamics is the first step in preventing the erosion of boundaries and rediscovering the deep connection that makes a marriage truly thrive. Rationalization: how the mind justifies infidelity. Here's where things get complicated. The human mind is extraordinarily skilled at rationalizing its actions, especially when those actions conflict with our deeply held values. When a married woman begins to engage in behavior that could be seen as emotionally or physically risky, it doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't begin with a grand, overt betrayal. Instead, it starts with something small, something that seems innocuous: a conversation with someone who isn't her husband, a brief exchange of compliments, a fleeting moment of attention from another person. At first, it doesn't feel like a betrayal. It's just a moment of connection, one that doesn't feel harmful at all. But the mind is clever, it knows how to bend reality. Over time, these small actions start to be justified, and the line between harmless and harmful becomes blurred. Rationalization begins to take root. The mind doesn't want to feel guilt, so it comes up with reasons to make the behavior seem acceptable. "It's just talking," she might say. "There's nothing wrong with it." She begins to tell herself that there's no harm in having these small interactions. In fact, they might even make her feel better, more validated, more seen. And in her mind, if it makes her feel good, it can't be that bad, right? This process of justification is rooted in what psychologists call cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance occurs when our actions contradict our beliefs, creating internal tension. The brain, seeking relief from this discomfort, starts to rationalize, changing the way we view our actions so they align with how we want to feel about ourselves. The tension between doing something that feels good but conflicts with our values becomes unbearable, so the mind twists the narrative. The woman might think, "I'm just enjoying a conversation. It's not like I'm cheating. I'm not doing anything wrong." And here lies the danger. The more the mind justifies, the further it leads her down a path she might not have intended to travel. Those small, seemingly innocent interactions, when left unchecked, start to add up. What begins as harmless flirting, a few words exchanged in passing, evolves into something more. The boundary between what is acceptable and what isn't starts to erode. And the mind keeps rationalizing. "If my husband paid more attention to me, I wouldn't need this. I deserve a little attention too. He's not noticing me anymore, so what's the harm in enjoying someone else's company?" The compartmentalization begins to take shape. She starts to separate this emotional connection from her marriage. "This is just something for me," she tells herself. "It doesn't affect my marriage. It's not that big of a deal." The mind convinces her that these moments, these small exchanges, are innocent, and that they are not really betraying her partner. She convinces herself that they are just a way to fill a need that has gone unmet, not a form of infidelity at all. But here's the crux of the problem. Emotional infidelity can be just as damaging as physical infidelity, and often, it's the first step toward deeper betrayal. The first time she shares something personal with someone other than her husband, she begins to shift her emotional connection away from her marriage. Late night texts, long conversations that stretch beyond the surface, the sharing of intimate thoughts and fears. These moments seem harmless at first, even necessary for emotional release. But they begin to form an emotional bond that becomes harder to ignore. This emotional investment in someone outside the marriage chips away at the connection between her and her spouse. It's in these moments that the mind gets further entangled in the web of rationalization. "I'm just being listened to," she may tell herself. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just connecting with someone who cares." The deeper the emotional intimacy becomes, the harder it is to distinguish between what is harmless and what is not. At some point, the mind begins to shift even further, and she may even convince herself that this new connection is fulfilling something her marriage no longer can. The line between emotional support and emotional betrayal becomes ever more blurred. The more the mind justifies these actions, the harder it becomes to see the damage they are causing. Once rationalization sets in, it's not long before the actions follow suit. This emotional infidelity, while not as physically overt as an affair, is still a betrayal. The emotional bond that grows with someone outside the marriage undermines the intimacy that once existed with her partner. And once this emotional boundary is crossed, physical boundaries may soon follow, often without her even realizing it. This is why rationalization is so dangerous. It allows the mind to carry on without fully confronting the consequences. Each small step feels justified, each interaction seems harmless, and the path to deeper betrayal remains hidden until it's too late. By the time she recognizes what has happened, the emotional distance from her spouse is profound, and the connection with the other person feels far more intense. In the end, rationalization isn't just a way to justify actions, it's a way to avoid the uncomfortable truth. It's a defense mechanism, designed to protect the ego and reduce guilt. But while it might shield her from immediate discomfort, it creates a path that leads further away from the emotional connection that once defined her marriage. And when the justifications run out, the reality of the betrayal is often far more devastating than any small justification could ever have prepared her for. The addiction of new connections, how temptation feels irresistible. The real danger begins when emotional infidelity starts to feel normal. Initially, a woman might convince herself that her interactions with someone outside her marriage are harmless, even trivial. But as these emotional exchanges deepen, they begin to fill a gap that she hadn't even realized was growing. The connection she shares with this new person, whether emotional or physical, becomes something her marriage no longer provides. It's a new excitement, a fresh sense of desire, a spark that reignites feelings of being wanted and seen. The marriage, which may have become routine and predictable, no longer has the same allure. In contrast, this new connection feels vibrant, exhilarating, and alive. The human brain is wired to seek pleasure, and the emotional highs of feeling desired are particularly potent. Neuroscientists have found that romantic attraction activates the same brain pathways as addiction. When we experience something that makes us feel special, our brain releases dopamine, the same chemical associated with pleasure and reward. This surge of dopamine creates a feeling of euphoria, much like the high an addict experiences. The emotional validation and excitement that comes with a new connection are intoxicating. It doesn't matter if she's married or committed to someone else, this rush feels like a form of renewal, a reminder of her worth outside the confines of her relationship. At first, the guilt is unavoidable. The first time she lies to her husband, the first time she hides a conversation or sneaks away to see someone in secret, it feels unnatural. She knows, deep down, that she is doing something wrong. The weight of guilt sits heavy in her chest, a reminder that her actions contradict the vows she made and the life she built. But as time passes, the guilt fades. The mind, ever adaptable, learns to suppress that discomfort, finding ways to justify the behavior. She starts to believe the lies she tells herself: this is harmless, or I'm not really doing anything wrong. It's just a conversation, just a harmless exchange. Compartmentalization becomes her coping mechanism. She keeps this new emotional connection separate from her marriage, as if it's a different part of her life, one that doesn't touch her commitment to her husband. She convinces herself that this relationship is something for her, something that she deserves, something that isn't a threat to her marriage. She tells herself that she is still faithful, that this new connection doesn't affect her loyalty to her spouse. But deep down, she knows she is replacing an emotional bond in her marriage with this new, exciting connection. The addictiveness of these new relationships can be powerful. Every time she feels desired, seen, or valued by someone outside her marriage, it reinforces the need for more of those emotional highs. Even if she tells herself that this will be the last time, the rush of dopamine, the excitement of feeling alive again, keeps her coming back for more. Each new interaction reinforces the cycle, each compliment or secret moment making her crave more, until it becomes a pattern. The danger here isn't just that she's cheating, it's that she's gradually losing the emotional connection to her marriage. What was once a deep bond, forged through years of companionship and shared history, starts to fade into the background. The new relationship, no matter how fleeting, fills the emotional void that she feels. It isn't just about the physical attraction, although that might be part of it. The real pull comes from the way she feels when she's in this new dynamic. She feels wanted, important, and alive again, feelings that have been missing for a long time. And that's the trap. What started as a simple, innocent interaction grows into something much more significant. She tells herself it's not a big deal, just a little excitement outside her marriage. But it becomes an addiction, and like any addiction, the more she feeds it, the more she needs it. The emotional bond she's forming with this other person begins to erode the emotional intimacy with her spouse. The more she justifies her actions, the more she distances herself from the person she once shared her deepest feelings with. This is the cruel irony. The very thing that made her feel alive again, the connection outside her marriage, is the very thing that is pushing her further away from the person she vowed to love and cherish. The more she seeks this emotional validation from another source, the more she disconnects from her spouse. It's no longer just about infidelity, it's about an erosion of emotional intimacy, where her deepest needs are no longer being met by the person she once thought would always be there to fulfill them. Eventually, the emotional high becomes so intoxicating that the relationship she's built with her spouse no longer holds the same meaning. She may still love him, but the emotional connection is no longer as strong as it once was. The other person, who has made her feel special and desired, becomes more of a priority. The marriage, which used to be her anchor, now feels like a distant memory, overshadowed by the thrilling and addictive new connection she's formed. This is the power of emotional infidelity. It doesn't always start with a physical affair, and it doesn't always happen overnight. It starts with a desire to feel wanted, the craving for emotional connection, and the mind's ability to justify actions that begin to chip away at the foundation of a marriage. It's this addictive cycle, this emotional high, that makes temptation so irresistible and, ultimately, so destructive. The breaking point, when everything shifts. Every relationship has a breaking point. It's that pivotal moment when things go from innocent to irreversible. It's the moment when a simple exchange, an innocent conversation, or a seemingly harmless connection starts to shift the dynamics of a marriage. The first time she meets up with someone outside her marriage, the first time she sends a message she knows she shouldn't, the first time she allows herself to linger in the excitement of someone else's attention, those are the moments that change everything. They don't feel like much at first. They don't feel like betrayal. But they are the first steps, and from there, everything starts to unravel. The most dangerous part of this process is that the first line crossed feels wrong. There's guilt, hesitation, and a sense of discomfort. She knows, deep down, that something is out of place. There is a fleeting moment of clarity where she recognizes that what she's doing goes against the very commitment she made. But that's the first step. After that, it becomes easier. The brain, in all its complexity, adapts. It becomes accustomed to the behavior, even justifying it. What once felt like a betrayal now feels normal. The first lie, the first secret, is the hardest. But after that, lying becomes second nature, and the emotional detachment from her marriage deepens. Each step away from her marriage feels like a small, insignificant movement. It's just one more text, one more conversation. It's easy to justify. It's nothing, she tells herself. It's just harmless fun. It's not like I'm cheating physically. And in her mind, she convinces herself that she can stop at any time. But here's the thing: the moment she allows that first connection, that first moment of emotional escape, she begins to form an emotional bond with someone outside of her marriage. And once that bond is formed, it's not easy to break. The emotional connection is real, even if the physical one isn't. It becomes a part of her, a need that wasn't being fulfilled at home. The sense of being seen, valued, and desired becomes intoxicating, and the marriage no longer feels like it once did. What she once considered wrong now feels less like a betrayal and more like a necessity. This is the breaking point, the place where the lines between right and wrong blur, and she no longer feels the same guilt she did initially. The first time she crossed the line, it was something she struggled with, but after that, the justification becomes easier, and the connection outside the marriage feels like a part of her life she can't give up. She tells herself that she can still stop, but the reality is, the deeper the emotional connection grows, the harder it is to return to what she had before. The truth is, once the emotional connection has been made, it's difficult to go back. The guilt fades, and in its place, there is a feeling of entitlement. She starts to rationalize, I deserve to feel good again, or I haven't felt this seen in years. The deeper the emotional entanglement, the harder it becomes to walk away from the attention and validation. And before she knows it, what started as a small, seemingly innocent action has completely shifted the course of her relationship. The breaking point is when she no longer sees her marriage as her primary source of love and connection. That point of no return is dangerous, not because she doesn't love her spouse, but because she has allowed someone else to fill the emotional void. And from this moment on, everything has shifted. What was once a betrayal now feels like a part of her reality, a part of her life that she's not ready to let go of. The unavoidable consequences. So, Why are some married women the easiest prey? It's not because they are weak or immoral. In fact, it's far more complex than that. They are looking for something they've lost: emotional intimacy, validation, excitement. These deep-seated desires are a natural part of who we are. Human beings crave connection and recognition, and when these needs aren't met in a marriage, they begin to seek fulfillment elsewhere, often without realizing the full scope of the consequences until it's too late. The real danger here doesn't lie solely in the physical act of infidelity. The true risk begins much earlier, in the emotional detachment that happens long before any physical betrayal occurs. It's the slow erosion of emotional intimacy. Once a woman starts justifying her actions, once she convinces herself that what she's doing is harmless, the lines become blurred. And when those lines are no longer clear, it becomes much harder to return to the relationship she once cherished. The emotional connection she forms outside the marriage can become so powerful that the bond with her spouse begins to feel secondary. Understanding this dynamic is crucial. The key to protecting relationships is recognizing the subtle signs of emotional disconnection before they become irreversible. It's easy to overlook small shifts in behavior, dismissing them as inconsequential, but these tiny cracks in the foundation can eventually cause the entire structure to collapse. If we can learn to identify these signs early when the emotional divide first starts to widen, we can intervene before the damage is done. The real power to safeguard relationships lies in understanding human nature, knowing when we are walking down a dangerous path and taking steps to course correct before it's too late. This is the hidden truth behind why some marriages unravel. Once we understand the mechanisms at play, we hold the power to protect our relationships, to avoid falling into the trap of justification, and to rebuild a stronger emotional connection. Emotional awareness is not just a tool, it's the key to a more resilient and enduring relationship. Take care, and remember, keeping our emotional connections alive is the best defense against the dangers that can quietly erode even the strongest of bonds.